Hey everyone, it's Bryce Edwards here. It is January 5th today. It's time to do a quick recap of what we saw in December. On this channel, we do a lot of real estate content. This one, we really just jump on the computer. We look at the data I can pull on my end. We kind of see where the market was, where it's heading. Myself, I'll be glad that 2023 is over. It was just a very sideways year. There was not a lot of movement really in any regards to pricing, to number of transactions, anything like that. Time will tell if we'll see if that's building up a lot of pent up demand and that will cause a surge if mortgage rates continue to go down. Before we jump into the computer, let me just mention if you're watching this video and somewhere along the line you're like, hey, I'd like to talk to Bryce, see how maybe this stuff pertains to me and my specific situation. The first link below will be a link to schedule a meeting like this with me. We do them over Zoom. That's the best way to get a hold of me because I can really make sure you have my undivided attention. Aside from that, my cell phone number is also down there. You can send me a text, give me a call. And then the only other thing I will mention is we do break this up into 3 different segments. So we'll talk a little bit about the macroeconomic data. But really what it comes down to is the 3 sections are the general market, the luxury market, and then the high-rise market. So if you're only looking for one of those, check the timestamps below. You can just scroll to the particular part you want. A lot of this is so granular. So if you want only one section, if you're only considering a high-rise here, jump to that part by all means. So without further ado, let's first talk about mortgage rates. Okay, so now that you can see my computer, let's just look at the 30-year fixed mortgage for the last year, which is really the story of everything. It shows why transactions have been so low and everything else. So as you can see, we started off the year, let's see here, right around 6.5%. And now if you look all the way to the end of, or to the beginning of this year, we're at 6.7. So essentially flat when you look over the term of the whole entire year. We did peak at 8% in October rather. And then you can see we've been trending down on what people are thinking is the Fed being able to handle inflation and potential for rate cuts happening as soon as March. So you can see some volatility here, like when there's good economic data, it really dropped, and we saw a lot of people come back into the market, like this drop that happened just this month. So for just this month, what we saw was we started the month here at, I think it should be like 7.09, yeah, 7.09%, and now we're at 6.75. So no huge drop, but it's definitely, now that there's a 6 as the first number, it's definitely bringing people back into the market. And I should mention, this data is pulled from Mortgage News Daily. I try to use the same one on all of my videos just so they're consistent throughout. So if you're doing like an FHA, a VA, your amount will be lower. If you're doing a jumbo, it'll likely be higher. But I just use this 30-year fixed number and we track it on every video just so it's consistent. Okay, so now let's jump into our first market segment. That will be just the general market. So what you're looking at here is this is data pulled directly from my MLS. So you won't see this on other sites like CNBC, Fox News, anything like that. This is just data that you can only see, if you're a realtor like I am. So what we're looking at here is the activity for the last 7 days. So what we're really seeing here is we actually had a decent amount of places go under contract. And we also had a decent amount of sales. With that being said, this is probably the first time we've outpaced new listings coming on the market. And I think it's mainly due to just the seasonality. I don't think this is a long-term indicator of the market heating up quite yet, even though we did have the mortgage drops. Because if I would have pulled this data, because I pulled this on the 31st, if I would have pulled it just 1 day later, we would have seen tons of homes come off the market and they're slowly going to be relisted once we get into later January, typically is what we see. So I don't think this is really an indicator of much, and we'll look at some seasonality stuff in a minute, but this is just what's been going on the last 7 days. So now our next one here we're looking at is just the number of sales in the single family housing market for the whole year. So as you can see, pretty flat. I think I have a chart here in a second that'll show this relative to other years, but very flat. And you can see as the year went on, we just cooled more and more and more, even though mortgage rates did go down during this time. Maybe you see this slight uptick here, but we'll see a lot of time, it takes 30 days, 45 days to close on a home. So a lot of this data is a little bit old. So that's why you've got to look for trends in this sort of stuff. So I would say the trend is rather flat and going downhill for the second half of the year. like I said, I'll be glad that 2023 is over and hopefully we get a better market in 2024. The next chart we're going to look at here is the active number of listings. So this is just how many listings are on the market. Same thing. It's just been so low in terms of the number of listings on the market, compared to normal, I should say. And what we're seeing is there's just so many people that have these low interest rates and they don't want to give up a 3% interest rate for a 7 or an 8% interest rate. So as that gap gets closer, people that are in a home they hate, it's going to be more and more appealing to just take that little bit higher of a rate. Maybe it's 1, 2, 3% higher, and they're okay with that because maybe the situation isn't working out where they currently are. Next one we're looking at here is just your days on market on average. So this is just how many days it takes for a property to sell. We'd really like to see this somewhere between 40 and 60 days. That's a pretty normal market for us here in Vegas. But you can see we went down a little bit and then we started going back up at the end. Once again, seasonality coming into play. When we were at 8% interest rates, we still stayed pretty steady here. So I think it still goes with the theme of what I've been saying in a lot of these videos. If a home is priced well and marketed well, it's still definitely selling because there's just not a lot of inventory to be picky about. And then months of inventory. So this is probably the best barometer for if we're in a seller's or a buyer's market. 4 to 6 months is considered a stabilized market. Anything under 4 is going to be a seller's market. And then anything over 6 is a buyer's market. And there's always degrees to that. So, I mean, if we're really down here in the 2 months of inventory, it's going to be much more of a seller's market than it would be just at 3. So that's kind of how you look at this number. I would say, we're sitting at a pretty normalized market, and we have been for much of the year. And then the last chart I wanted to show you for the general market is this is just a number of sales, and this is looking at over the last 10 years. So definitely you can see that seasonality because, as I've mentioned, it's always a lagging indicator because it takes a little bit of time for a home to actually sell once it goes under contract. But essentially every time the new year comes around, we see a drop other than 2021. Everybody, that time has passed. It's maybe time to stop talking about that. But we saw that here and we're seeing it again. But if you just look at this number that we were sitting at for 2023 compared to years past, you can see just how few number of sales did happen in 2023. I think there's a lot of pent-up demand, maybe more so than there even was in COVID. It's just going to be a matter of those rates and what people can afford because it feels a lot like it did to me when I first got in the business, which was about 2013, when back then the difference was you weren't able to qualify for a mortgage. Now it's you can't afford a mortgage for a lot of people, but we're seeing a large influx of buyers that are using cash to purchase homes in these days, much more than we were back when I first started. So I think that's the other factor that's coming into play a lot. There's just a lot more people that can just sell their home in a place like California, take that equity, buy a home for all cash here, and not worry about the high interest rates. And they may be the people that in years to come, we look back and it's like, wow, they got such a great deal. But only time will tell. So now let's start on our second segment. This will be the high-rise segment of the video. We will once again start with the MLS data that only I can pull. So this is just showing what's happened in the last 7 days in the high-rise market. As you can see, not a ton of activity. I want to say there's only like 370 listings total for the high-rise market. It's not a large market here, but a lot of people like to buy a second property here, and there's a lot of luxury buildings that I like to work in, so that's why we do talk about it, even though it's not a large market. So as you can see, we outpaced new listings a little bit, but I think it's just a lot of seasonality going on. There's just not a lot of people to buy in December anyways, so nothing really to me that gives you an indicator either way, but this is just for your data, I guess. If you're following along each video, I guess you could always pull this up and reference it. So let's look at our next thing. So this is just going to be the number of sales for the year. Very flat year. We're sitting, I don't have the 10-year pulled up for this particular chart, but we just sat very flat. We saw, when I was working during this spike, we were having places sell for over ask at some of these towers. Some of them were selling before they could even hit the market. Some of them were selling the day they hit the market. So very competitive back here. Also, I closed another one in August and September. That was also very hard to find a great deal in. So The high-rise market is just so much different because most of the sales in the high-rise market do happen in cash. So it's still a very active market regardless of interest rates. But when interest rates did peak at 8% here, you can see it was a little bit lower in terms of sales volume for a little bit. So next one, active number of listings. Nothing really to grab out of here that tells us any sort of story other than sitting relatively flat. We're sitting in a pretty balanced market in terms of people are picking up listings as quickly as they're coming on the market. So we're not seeing fluctuations even with fluctuations in interest rates. Days on market average, this just tells you how many days it takes to actually sell a place here. So nothing really to extract from this either because, I mean, we're sitting relatively flat when you take the averages and maybe slightly trending down. But with there not being tons of data, with there only being 300 and so listings on the market at any given time, you can't really take too much information off of this. Lastly, months of inventory. So as a reminder, 4 to 6 months is considered a balanced market in general. Anything above the 6 months would be a buyer's market, and there's always degrees to that. So the higher you are in that months of inventory, the more of a buyer's market is, the more negotiating power you have. So the lower it is, same thing. The lower it gets, the more you have upward pricing pressure as a seller, and the more you might get multiple offers. So you can see we only touched the 4, which is the very bottom range, for a couple of months. This is when the market was pretty heated up when we look back. So really, it stayed pretty level. It's a pretty balanced market. It's just not a super active market, so there's just not as much data. So it can be a little bit more volatile than a lot of other markets. And then lastly, we're just looking at the sales price average. So about the same thing, we're sitting pretty flat for the year. We had a couple of spikes in February and March. I think there was one sale for, I want to say 8 million, and maybe it was 9 million in Turnberry Place rather. So that's probably what bumped that number up for the month. Typically when the Waldorf Astoria has a sale or Turnberry Place, it'll make a little bit more volatility in there just because those sales are so expensive. Just 2 days ago, the largest sale ever in the Waldorf Astoria just closed at over $9 million. So we'll see when we do our January market report that we'll see probably another spike in the sales price average just because of that one sale. That's just how sensitive the market is to changes. Okay, so our last segment is the luxury segment, and I find this one pretty interesting for a number of factors. One is Vegas was never really known for its luxury segment just a number of years ago. So it's really turned into a place where a lot of tech people, a lot of people who even run like, Panda Express, like the owner of that moved here to the Summit. So we have a lot of people that are big in business that are now relocating to here. And it's really made a luxury market out of something that there wasn't really one before. And that's why we're seeing so many communities develop like this Summit, Ascaya. The Ridges has been here for a while. You have McDonald Highlands, you have Southern Highlands. I mean, you've got to have places to put all these people that are playing for the Raiders, the Golden Knights, the Aces, soon to be the Oakland or the Las Vegas A's, and then potentially an NBA team in the near future too. So as Las Vegas is changing for the better, in my opinion, we're going to see a lot more activity in this luxury segment. So the first one I wanted to look at is just a number of sales over $1 million in the last 10 years. So as we look at this data, you can see we didn't really have a lot going on for much of the time. And then as you can see around COVID time, we started to see a little bit of spike in 2019. And then this would have been right when the Summit was starting to sell some of their land deals. So that's probably around that time. But as you can see, right after COVID, we've just seen a rush of people purchase multi-million-dollar places here in Las Vegas. That's also due a little bit to just home appreciation, because as you get more appreciation, an $800,000 house will eventually become $1 million house, and then you're just going to have a more active luxury segment. I think for Vegas, a safe estimate is anything over $1 million currently, but I think we might see a future where that number might be more like 2 million, 2.5, something like that. It's not like we're ever going to catch Las Vegas or Los Angeles or Miami or San Francisco prices, but I think we are going to maybe close the gap some, just not a lot. So I thought this chart was interesting, just a number of sales. You can see just the Las Vegas market is very active in this $1 million plus range. And then this is just kind of the same thing. So we're looking at the last 10 years, and this is the number of listings over $5 million, which like that used to be basically a non-existent segment. It used to be reserved for large estates that there weren't many of, and they would sit on the market for years. You would have 500 days on market until something sold. But I mean, we've had, in just the last couple of years, we've had multiple sales happen over $25 million and at $25 million. We had the place, the Blue Heron custom build that they're currently still using as their main campus. So we had that one that's sold for 25, back on the market at the time of this recording for a little bit over 30. We had the largest estate owned by that Prince in Spanish Trails, traded for $25 million, even though it wasn't completed. We also had Celine Dion sell her place in the Summit for $30 million in an off-market deal. So like that category of home didn't really exist before. $5 million would buy you just like the best estate you could ever think of. But like pricing's gotten a little bit crazy. I mean, that $10 million and over range is a little bit more active than you would imagine. So I thought this was just a little bit interesting. This is just a number of listings over that $5 million range. You can tell it's starting to definitely become a segment, especially over in Escaya, McDonald Highlands, and even in the Ridges. The Ridges, I mean, you used to be able to buy on the course for about $4 million or so. Now for $4 million over there, you're going to be buying one of the William Lyons custom homes. Probably for $4 million, you're going to be more in Silver Ridge than you are in Sterling Ridge. But I mean, to get on the course now, you're probably going to be at $5 to $6 million or something like that. Okay, so now that we've gotten through that data, let's just look at some general charts for the last year, since we're kind of doing a year in review sort of thing here. So this is just the active number of listings over $1 million. That's where I'm defining luxury for this. So as you can see, very flat for the whole year. We've seen good absorption, I guess you could say, because we haven't seen spikes even when mortgage rates were at 8% back here. You know, the luxury segment is very similar to the high-rise segment because a lot of these deals do happen in cash or private financing. So now we're just looking at the number of sales for the past year. So as you can see, we did have it heat up a little bit when it came to the normal summer months when people move. Late spring, early summer, that's when a lot of people choose to buy in Las Vegas, generally speaking. They want to get all their family settled before the new school year. So we did see that, even though rates continued to climb during this time. So I think this is a little bit interesting compared to like the general market, where we're seeing a lot more volatility in the time of year compared to a lot of the other markets, because a lot of people are still buying when it comes to December, November in a normal market. But it seems like, based on the data for the last year, people are choosing to make their purchases from March to about July. And you've got to think, this data is a little bit lagging because if you went under contract in February, I mean, you're always going to have a 30-day probably closing time frame. So you're not going to close that February contract until March. So that's, you know, looking like maybe we'll have another big February here where a lot of people are looking for a home again. Only time will tell. You'll have to tune into that video to find out. So now let's just look on days on market. This is always interesting to me because I remember when days on market for a luxury home here in Vegas was always like 100 days on market to get something sold. But as you can see, this is a pretty normal market. I would, you know, for a normal price range, I think we would like to see it towards like 30 to 60 days, but we're pretty close to that range for most of the year. This is basically the inverse of the last chart that we looked at. If you almost flip the other chart, that's what we're looking at here, because as those number of sales happened, we just absorbed a lot, and then a lot more homes got picked up off the market. So days to sell, essentially the same thing. It's just another metric, but I'll just let you pause the video if you want to check this part out. But essentially the same thing, and it has much of the same volatility in it. Months of inventory. So in the general market, without any price range cap, 4 to 6 is the limit for a normal market, but we've always set a little bit above that here in Vegas. So I would say we're sitting in a pretty balanced market in terms of what's actually happening. So that really wraps up all of our segments. So we've broken down all 3 different segments, and we've talked a little bit about the macroeconomic data too. So what I've said from the beginning is how I kind of feel. I feel like the market was pretty flat for most of the year across all segments. The luxury segment was a little bit more active than many of the other segments that we discussed. But I would say it's set fairly flat. I think we'll have to see what's going on with economic data in the months and weeks to come. If the rates continue to go down, I think we will see probably an influx of buyers in 2024, or if they even stay flat for the time being, because I think we're seeing a lot of people move from California in the West Coast again. Not numbers like we were during COVID, but we're definitely seeing that number pick up again. I'm getting a lot of people reach out to me that are looking to move before the school year. So we'll see what that entails with time going forward. As I mentioned earlier, all my information is in the link below. So make sure to check that out if you're interested in getting in contact with me. If not, make sure you subscribe. Check out the rest of the videos we have on this channel if you're looking for more information. If not, I'll catch you in the next one.